Throughout world history, countless wars have been fought around the globe over issues ranging from religious differences, territorial disputes, politics, and ethnicity. While war, in itself, is always destructive and costly, there exists a handful of wars in history that have proven quite devastating in regard to both deaths and overall destruction. This work examines the top 10 deadliest wars in human history. If you like what you see, then remember to subscribe. Let's count it. 10. 30 Years' War. Between 1618 and 1648, the European powers of the time fought in Central Europe in the 30 Years' War. Despite the fact that the war began as a fight between Protestant and Catholic states from the dissolving Holy Roman Empire, it swiftly grew to encompass most of Europe in the years that followed. Thousands of people died as a result of the vast mobilization of forces, including a considerable presence of mercenary troops, making the 30 Years' War one of the worst conflicts in human history. The 30 Years' War is thought to have killed approximately 8 million people and injured countless others. 9. Chinese Civil War. The Chinese Civil War was fought in China in the mid-20th century between communist forces and the Republic of China. The Chinese Civil War was split into two eras, the first lasting from 1927 to 1936 and the second lasting from 1946 to 1950. Due to the outbreak of World War II, the war erupted following the fall of the Qing dynasty. Conflict erupted swiftly as the government and communist factions attempted to seize power in the following power vacuum, with disastrous results. Over 8 million people are thought to have died in the Chinese Civil War, military and civilians. Throughout the war, both Communist and Kuomintang armies perpetrated enormous atrocities and genocides, killing many of these people. 8. The Russian Civil War. The Russian Civil War lasted from 1917 to 1926 and was fought between the Red Army, Communist, and the White Army, Nationalist, armies. Following the demise of Tsar Nicholas II's rule and the collapse of the Russian Empire, Bolshevik troops led by Vladimir Lenin fought nationalist forces for control of Russia's interior, with horrific consequences in terms of lives lost and property destroyed. Several skirmishes and conflicts erupted in the country's interior throughout the 6-year struggle, which pitted Russians against Russians. Despite tremendous losses on both sides of the conflict, the ceasefire was short-lived, as the victorious communist administration quickly ushered in decades of tyranny and repression. The Russian Civil War occurred during a difficult moment in Russian history, with the Tsar's power being radically shifted to revolutionary forces. It's hard to know how many people died in total. Despite this, historians now agree that the conflict killed approximately 9 million people, with millions more wounded or seriously afflicted. 7. The Dongdan Revolt. The Dongdan Revolt, or Hui Minorities' War, took place in western China from 1862 to 1877. In response to the Qing dynasty's continuous religious and racial discrimination, Hui Muslims in China began rioting. In response to the disturbances, the Qing authorities acted quickly, unleashing terrible reprisals and executions against Hui Muslims across western China. The Hui rebels were outmanned and outgunned by their opponents, who mounted a total war campaign against both rebels and Muslim civilians as the conflict proceeded. Due to China's large population and the chaotic conditions on the ground in 1862 throughout the region, scholars are having difficulties calculating current fatality estimates for the Dongdan Revolt. According to latest estimates, the violence has killed around 10 million people, with millions more civilians, rebels, and army injured. These numbers could be significantly higher. Overall death figures could potentially be as high as 20 million. 6. First World War. The Great War, often known as the First World War, was a global struggle that began on July 28, 1914, in Europe. During the 4-year conflict, almost 70 million military people were deployed, with fighting taking place in nearly every corner of the globe save the European continent. With massive political, social, economic, and cultural changes, Europe was left in ruins on a scale never seen before in history when the war concluded in November 1918. During the Great War, roughly 9 million military members died, with an additional 9 to 10 million civilians murdered. Scholars ascribe the massive death tolls to technological advancements, particularly the entrance of the machine gun, chemical weapons, and the introduction of airplanes. The war may account for an additional 50 to 100 million lives. To this day, the Great War remains one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. 5. Taiping Rebellion. Between 1850 to 1864, the Taiping Rebellion, or Taiping Civil War, in China was fought between the Qing government and the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. The Taiping army started a nationalist, political, and religious war against the Qing dynasty, led by Hong Xiuquan, who claimed to be Jesus Christ's brother, in order to convert the Chinese people to Christianity, and toppling the Qing government in the process. At its apex, the Taiping rebels, based in modern-day Nanjing, controlled wide parts of South China, with an estimated 30 million people under their authority. Estimating casualties from the Taiping Rebellion is difficult due to a lack of government data from this time period. Most estimates put the death toll between 20 and 30 million people, with many more injured. The Taiping Rebellion is still acknowledged as one of history's bloodiest civil wars and the 19th century's biggest conflict. 4. The Qing conquest of the Ming dynasty. From 1618 to 1683, the Qing dynasty overthrew the Ming dynasty, which is known as the Ming-Qing transition or the Manchu conquest of China. Based on a list of complaints known as the Seven Grievances, which highlighted the underlying social and political challenges facing China at the time, rebel troops, along with bands of peasants, waged war against the ruling Ming dynasty in the hopes of achieving reform. Total casualties are impossible to verify because of the immense social, political, and economic upheaval generated by the fight, as with past conflicts from this time period and transition. However, it is now estimated that approximately 25 million people died as a result of the battle. As a result of the frequent fights, thousands of people have been maimed or scarred. 3. Second Sino-Japanese War. Between the Republic of China and the Imperial Japanese Empire, the Second Sino-Japanese War was fought. Thousands of Chinese citizens and military men were raped, pillaged, and killed by Japanese soldiers during the fighting, which lasted from July 7, 1937, until September 2, 1945. Though estimates vary, the Second Sino-Japanese War is thought to have killed around 29 million people, depending on the source. On both the Chinese and Japanese sides, between 20 and 25 million civilians were butchered, with 4 to 5 million military personnel being killed. The rape of Nanking is said to have killed 300,000 Chinese citizens, with another 20,000 women raped by Japanese troops. 2. An Lushan Rebellion. The An Lushan Rebellion, which began on December 16, 755 AD, was a major Chinese war. In defiance of the Tang dynasty, General An Lushan declared himself emperor of northern China, initiating a nearly 8-year uprising. The Tang dynasty enlisted 4,000 mercenaries to accompany their army in the struggles that followed, fearing that their reign would come to an end. In 763 AD, the conflict, which lasted 3 emperors and wreaked devastation on China's social, economic, and political systems, came to a conclusion. Overall fatality numbers for the An Lushan Rebellion are impossible to establish because of the uncertain social and political circumstances that resulted from the dissatisfaction of many populations in the region. In total, scholars have placed overall deaths, for both military and civilians, at an astounding 36 million people. 1. Second World War. From 1939 to 1945, the Second World War, commonly known as World War II, was a massive worldwide conflict that involved nearly every country on the earth. For over 6 years, the two military coalitions, separated into two camps, the Axis versus the Allies, were at war, with horrible consequences in terms of death and damage. With disastrous repercussions, an estimated 100 million military men from roughly 30 different countries were sent into the conflict. The war destroyed tens of thousands of cities and killed millions of people. War is still a horrible reality for much of the world. Ethnic tensions, religious divisions, and political differences all add to an inexhaustible supply of antipathy and hatred that leads to bloodshed all too frequently. With the dawn of the nuclear age and the development of WMDs, the horrific possibility of conflict has never been greater in world history. Weapons of mass destruction. Latest: the war in Ukraine. Here on the channel we stand with Ukraine. If you also stand with Ukraine, remember to subscribe. See you.